everybody, and welcome to the Ultimate Health Model Podcast, where we take a deep dive into uncharted waters on everything related to health. Today, I have the distinguished honor to talk to Daniel Trevor. I'm kind of like a loss of words here because we're going to start with First, we're going to start with a statistic you said, and then we're going to start with a little story of background about how we kind of got together and met, not in person, but online, and how we kind of got together that way. So the startling statistic in your book that you start with you said that people who have heart disease also have diabetes, period. And I thought that was really profound. And for our friends listening, just think about that. I know you're listening on your on your earplugs or whatever. Take a second, go, oh man, that's pretty amazing. So we can go further into that later in the conversation, but I kind of wanted to start with that to get people's attention. So basically, the way me and Daniel met, I saw him on a podcast with Ken Berry. And a lot of people listening might know Ken Berry's name, but he's very strong in the carnivore, low carb space. And I was watching a video with him, and he was talking about carbs and how not to eat carbs and inflammation, all these things. And he mentioned this thing called, in his book, he has the Unholy Trinity. The book's called, I can put it up here for people to see. There it is. Awesome book. The Unholy Trinity, how carbs, sugars, and seals make us sick, fat, addicted, and how to escape their grip. And so I have wrote my own book on health, and I call it The Triad of Demise. I thought, okay, me and Daniel have to talk. There's just no way. I have to talk to this guy. So we went around for a month or so on emails, finally got a hold of him, and I said, you're my brother from another mother, because we're talking about the same thing here. And I thought it was, I just was blown away at the coincidence on that. And so we started talking, got to be friends. And I am just delighted to have him on my program, because what he says in his book is just the same thing I say in my book. It's very down to earth. Our writing styles are the same too. That's what I really loved about his book. We write the same kind of no nonsense, no BS, very approachable writing style. So anyway, Daniel, why don't you introduce yourself to our friends listening on kind of your story and how you got to where you are.
Okay, Ben. Hey, thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it. And by the way, I love your book too. And you're right. I mean, we were just right on the same path there. And I came to it in a different way. Yours was from observation and direct looking at things. Mine was from having this life-threatening event, which is my biggest regret, to having to have that in order to place me on this path. You were already on it. I needed to find you years ago. But anyway, so what happened to me was about 4 years ago, I almost died of a heart attack. And it was completely shocking to me because I thought I was Mr. Healthy. I was a lean, symptom-free person. And, I was fortunate early on to learn how to study well. Not that I was a super grade A student, but if there was anything that I really wanted to conquer, I could master it. I was just really good at that because I learned how to study. And having studied technical data all my life, I decided to take a dive into the medical science to find out how the hell could this happen to me? I'm Mr. Healthy, right? And what I found, it just really shocked and blew my mind, and actually infuriated me because what we've been told to eat for decades is killing us.
Yeah.
And so what I did was, I decided, well, first of all, it was a very kind of I don't want to say selfish, but more self-centered writing and investigation of this. I didn't have a book in mind or anything. I just wanted to know how this happened to me. And so as I was going down all the research, and I had so many, I guess you would call WTF moments about big food, big pharma,
Yeah.
and big
Yeah.
medicine. It
Yeah.
was like, are you kidding me? And then I thought, oh my God, I got to share this with my brother and sister fellow humans to tell them that we've been lied to with false data and fake science. And besides it being a how-to book on how I reversed these 4 comorbidities that I had, which I'll tell you about, it is a bit of an expose on the big 3, the big food, big pharma, and big medicine. Having said that, now I'm sure there are wonderful, beautiful people in all 3. It's just that there's certain things that are just very awry, and they're more concerned with profits and bottom line as opposed to what's good for human beings. Anyway,
Can I stop you really quickly
yeah,
first?
sure.
So, for our listening audience and friends listening, what what he means by that, and what they say things gone awry, big pharma, big food, and big medicine, they're there to make a profit. And I think what people need to understand that this is not rocket science. This is a
Right.
business. Okay, so if they have to make money, then they have to sell pills or drugs or whatever. So for our friends listening, just understand that. And from what Daniel's saying about that angle, they need to make money. And then work your way backwards. Go, okay, well, if they need to make money, is this necessarily good for me? So just put your thinking hat on, friends listening, and go from there.
Yeah, no, exactly. Listen, and I don't want to, curse everything that big pharma makes because some
No,
of the things
it's
that are
great.
very good, and
Yeah,
also big medicine. I mean, geez, we have 24-hour heroes working for us. They're setting our bones and suturing up the
absolutely.
wounds and removing bullets and steering wheels from our chests and all
Yeah.
that, right? So I love all of them. Even my older daughter Chloe is works in the ER, and I talk to her about this stuff all the time because the people she sees coming in with the what they call diabetes and that kind of thing. And see, besides it being, a how-to book and kind of an expose in big food, big pharma, big medicine, it's also what you would call a situation and data analysis of this. In 1930, the obesity rate was 1%.
Yeah.
We are now approaching 50% in under 100 years. And never before in human history has a population gotten so fat and so sick so fast. You got to say, what the hell is happening? And when you pull the strings and you look at what's going on and you do the analysis, it's the unholy trinity, which was never in the human diet prior to 100 years ago. I mean, we had grains and sugar, but not in the amounts and concentrations that we do now. See, in 1900, people died of infectious diseases like, you know, um, tuberculosis, influenza, that kind of thing. The very first officially recorded heart attack wasn't until 1912.
Yeah.
And cancer was not even a thing, as they call it, until the 30s. And
Yeah.
now both of them are top killers, right?
Let,
Heart
let, let me
disease
let me
and
interrupt you really
cancer.
quickly there
Well,
too.
what's
The how and when they talk about genetics, right? So what you're saying, to piggyback off what you're saying, then if these other diseases are the number one killers now, well then why weren't they back then? I mean, that
exactly?
you just got to use common sense. So if it's genetics, then it would be the same percentage of people dying from these diseases back then, approximately, as is today. If that's not the case, then you can't use genetics as the main cause. This is not rocket science.
You're exactly right. I mean, Dr. Thomas Seyfried covers that clearly,
Yeah,
and he's got the proof. Thomas Seyfried, Seyfried, and he's discovered. He says, "Look, we have the proof. Cancer is a metabolic disease. It's not a genetic disease. I mean, it can be in your genes and your genetics, but like I have on page 1 of chapter 1." Genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the
yes,
trigger
yes,
or keeps the safety on.
yep,
Genetics loads the gun. You may have it there, but it's your lifestyle,
absolutely.
mostly what you eat, that pulls the trigger or doesn't. So, it's obvious that that's what happened because, first of all, when I'm talking about the carbs, when I'm talking about the ultra processed and refined grains that they turn into powders, that they then turn into bread, pasta, cereal, biscuits, waffles, pancakes, chips, pretzels, rolls, pizza, and on and on. And then we also have the candy cake, ice cream, soda, fruit juice, and on there. And then, of course, you have the oils, which were never even discovered or never even, well, they came out of cottonseed
Yeah.
farming, and it was a
Yeah.
cottonseed
Fascinating.
oil. And, in the
As a byproduct,
Industrial Revolution, say again?
as a byproduct of cottonseed. So they go, they thought, well, what can we do with this oil? And someone had the brilliant idea, well, why don't you put in the food supply? Someone else goes, hey, sounds great, let's do it. I mean, these things are just absurd, and to back to what you're saying for our friends listening, about the carbs and the sugar and the flours. I think what they need to understand, and I write this in my book, if you remember, sugar is glucose, and starch is just a bunch of glucose molecules stuck together. And simple sugars are single glucose molecules, and there's different forms of sugar. But to make things really simple for our audience, I think what they need to understand, and my epiphany about when I was writing my book, is that water, when you put water with sugar, when you make a paste, like when you're cooking, what happens when you mix water and sugar together? It makes a paste. It turns sticky. And so in my book, I wrote that the reason the body has to get rid of the sugar, as you know, Daniel, is because the insulin's job is not to put the sugar into the cells. This is my theory on it. It's kind of a little bit controversial. It's not to put sugar into the cells, but it's to keep the blood flowing. What do I mean by that? If there's too much sugar in the blood, think about when you're making a recipe. Pour a bunch of sugar in water, because blood's mostly water, like 80% approximately. You mix them together, you get a paste, it gets sticky. The blood's not going to flow. And if the blood doesn't flow, you ain't alive. So I think people, right? And you're smiling because I think that's a very important point for people to understand why sugar and carbs are really problematic in excessive amounts, especially the refined ones. Now, the fruits and the vegetables, the fruits, because the vegetables don't have many carbs, but the fruits have the sugar, but it has the fiber to help to offset that, balance, and offset the sugar going into the bloodstream. So I think that's an important point. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I wanted to make sure our audience, our viewers, or our friends listening knew that's really what's the problem with sugar, is it thickens the blood, and that's not debatable. And as I said, if the blood gets thick and it doesn't flow, you're not alive. So it's an emergency for the body to remove them. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I thought that was an important point while we're on
No,
this subject. Yeah,
No, it's very valid, very valid.
yeah,
And just to put a period at the end of the sentence on the oils, I mean, they looked at a bucket of it. There was these two guys that came from Europe. One's name was William Proctor and the other was James Gamble, Procter and Gamble.
yeah.
And they came up with this item called Crisco,
Hmm.
which started flying off the shelves in 1911. And these oils they were looked at as a toxic waste, basically. They were never meant for human consumption. They looked at a bucket of it and they said, hey, it looks like lard. Why don't we sell it to people? Because, to cook, we can make some money that way, right?
Yeah,
And,
it's
so
amazing.
they, like I said, started flying off the shelves then. And then, I have this chart. In my book, I have a lot of graphs and charts and images and that kind of thing. I want to make it easier for the reader to understand
Yeah,
why some of these, just what because there's a lot of science in it, but it's written for the average reader of health and wellness. I mean, if I have to
yes,
use a technical term, I'll explain what it is. Like if I have
yes.
to say endothelium, in parentheses, I'll put lining of the arteries. And after I've done that a couple of times, hey, endothelium, I got it. He's
Hmm.
talking about the lining of the arteries and how they can become destroyed and so forth. Anyway, I have this one graph in the book that shows the level of heart disease from 1900 to 1955, and it's going like this, right? 1900s over here, 1955. So what happened in 1955 was President Eisenhower had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And it was a big deal. Everybody was freaking out because a lot of men and women in their prime were just dropping like flies from this heart disease. What they discovered years later, after they discovered this, it's called electron microscopy, where they can snake up these very tiny cameras into the arteries and in the heart and take a close look. What they discovered was there was this thing called the glycocalyx.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is that? Glycocalyx is this fuzz-like lining on the lining of the arteries that acts as the first line of protection against what's called small, dense LDL particles. And those are the ones, most people know them as bad cholesterol.
Yeah,
Not
which
even
is
good or
wrong.
bad, but
Which is wrong.
bad
Yeah.
cholesterol. And they are tiny and they can invade the artery wall, get stuck in what's called the intima media space, build up over time, and they turn into plaque, which then causes your heart attacks and strokes and so forth, right? And then what they discovered was years later was smoking destroys the glycocalyx.
Yeah.
And it was an epidemic back there. Everybody smoked, the doctors smoked around their patients. I mean, it was just like, it was insane.
Yeah.
Everywhere, restaurants, planes, and everything. So
Let me
that was that. And then
let me interrupt you really quickly on that. I'm
sure.
sorry, but I want to make sure that our friends listening understand the importance of these things. The glycocalyx, for our friends listening, the glycocalyx is the layer, like he's talking about, or that surrounds all endothelium. But what it also it is actually it envelops every single cell. It's not just the endothelium. So people need to understand that. It's every
Sure.
single cell. There's actually a glycocalyx type of layer around even the LDL particles, the HDL particles, all the lipoproteins. So what do I mean by that? Well, what Daniel just said was that smoking destroys this layer, as well as we'll talk about the carbs and the sugar as well. But this layer, what it does, and it's fascinating. And I talked with my other guest, Dr. Robert Kiltz, in our first podcast, and we discussed this at length because we're both kind of nerdy when it comes to the glycocalyx. But suffice to say, what it does is it is a signaling system of every single cell. So this glycocalyx layer has these proteins. It's all these proteins are embedded in the cell membrane, and then they have these sugar chains attached to them. And to simplify this, what that means is all these membrane proteins in the cell membrane are acting like signals with all the other cells, and they're signaling molecules. So what Daniel said and why I had to, elaborate on this because it's so important, the glycocalyx. And it's not just smoking, and it's not just the sugar, it's also stress, it's also bad thoughts, it's everything that causes inflammation and stress, which Daniel talks eloquently about in his book. So I'm sorry, Dan, but I just want to make sure that that they really understand how important this is.
Yeah, no, you're so right. They are all around our cells and so forth. But what I'm specifically talking about there is just the arterial
Yeah,
lining.
absolutely.
That's glycocalyx because
Yeah.
like you say, there are in different places.
Yeah.
But yeah, and taking that a little further, as you know, there was this guy that came along in the 1950s by the name of Ansel Keys.
We don't like that guy.
And we know about that joker.
That
And he
joker.
had this concept that it was the meat and the butter and the
Oh,
cheese that was clogging up the arteries and, causing like a clogging there. And that's what was the
Mhm.
source of it all. But what doesn't work that way at all. He got the idea into people's heads. What was it? It was, that it was like a shower drain.
Yeah.
When it has the hair and the grease and the gook and the
Yeah.
soap and all clogs up. It's not that way at all.
It doesn't work that way.
In fact, the plaque is underneath the
Absolutely.
artery, not
Yeah.
in the lumen where the blood
Yeah.
flows.
Yes.
Anyway, so but he was very influential.
Mhm.
And unfortunately for Eisenhower, Eisenhower was assigned his own personal doctor, Dr. Paul Dudley White. And he unfortunately was good friends with Ansel Keys, right? And so they put him on a low carb diet. I mean, not a low carb diet. That's wrong. They put him on the opposite of a low
High carb
fat
diet.
diet is what I mean to say.
Yeah.
They put a low fat, but then he developed type 2 diabetes. He had a stroke, multiple heart attacks, and ultimately died of intractable heart failure, right? Got into stage 4. But anyway, but at the same time, there was this guy in England named Dr. Yudkin, Yudkin,
Mm-hmm.
and he was trying to bring the attention to the mounting evidence that the fact that it was sugar
Yeah.
and grains that was the cause of all this. He even wrote a book called Pure, White, and Deadly.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out that he was right, but all the attention was going on to Ansel Keys and then within 10 years, you have big food creating all of these low-fat creations of, the snacks and everything. And this is by the late 60s, early 70s. But they're filled with carbohydrates and sugars. And what do we find out later is that the refined carbohydrates from grains and sugars is an even worse destroyer of the glycocalyx. It's like, what?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
So we replaced one destroyer of the glycocalyx, which is very important, as we just covered,
Mm-hmm.
with one that's even worse. So, it was just insane. And
well, and
so,
then just to piggyback off that as well, when you were saying that Ansel Keys, so they're saying that the fat and all that is causing the heart disease, and it plugs up it like a drain, and so all the saturated fat and is bad for you, right? Well, statistics, important statistic here is that meat consumption has actually gone down I think it's down or at least relatively stable in the last 100 years. So if that's causing problems, once again, people listening, our friends listening need to understand, just put your thinking hat on. Just take a really, common sense approach and a critical eye to this. If saturated fat and meat has stayed relatively the same, then how could this be a problem? So there's a really a discordance in this theory that doesn't make sense.
yeah, no, exactly. You're so right. And, once people get a certain idea in their minds, it gets stuck there. It's kind of like, reminds me of Mark Twain's quote.
Oh, yeah, you
He
have it in your
said,
book.
it's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled.
Yeah, I love that.
It's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled, because once they get that idea of the shower drain and all that kind of thing,
it just
hey, my doctor
good.
says so.
Yeah.
My doctor's got a white jacket, knows all, sees all. Right?
Yeah. Well,
when doctors are not taught any of this in medical school, because the medical schools are underwritten by Big Pharma. And Big Pharma wants them reaching for the prescription pad. They don't want them talking about, diet and exercise. I mean, when's the last time you heard any doctor say, hey, so what's your diet like these days? Are you walking? Are you getting to the gym? But what's the first question that your vet, when you bring little Poochie to the vet, one of the first questions is, so what are you feeding little Poochie?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
But that doesn't happen in human medicine.
No. And so let's talk about, so to go to another topic, what's related, why don't you explain to our friends listening about these studies? And I write in my book the same thing you write in your book about how the studies are not accurate, how they're observational, they ask people what they ate. How can that be accurate? Why don't you talk a little bit more about that? Because when I realized that when I was writing my book, in the beginning, it really infuriated me at first. I'm like, are you kidding me? I believe this stuff because they were based on this flawed, inaccurate associations that don't mean anything. You probably should throw them all in the trash. That really infuriated me when I heard that. So why don't you tell our friends listening about that? Because I think it's super important, Daniel.
Yeah, well, if the results of the difference between observational, epidemiological, which what Benjamin is talking about there, is the fact that, like you say, they're like kind of like, what are they? Food memory,
food frequency
like,
questionnaires.
how many times in the last month did you eat a plum? I don't know. I don't remember what I ate my breakfast, So they ask these questions and they base their studies on this.
Which is
And,
ridiculous.
the whole thing with meat. I mean, if you look at a graph, and I have this graph I got it from Nina Teicholz, who, gave me a wonderful endorsement for the book. She's New York Times bestselling author of that wonderful, amazing book,
Mm-hmm.
The
Big
Big
fat
Fat
surprise.
Surprise,
Yeah.
Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet, which rocked the world. This is like 2014. And she gave me this graph where she shows how diabetes is going like this from bottom left to top right. And the meat consumption is going from the top left to bottom right. It's
Yeah.
like just the opposite. So it can't be, because
Yeah.
there was some recent BS press releases about, and they don't check any of these things, of course, about the fact that meat was causing diabetes. I mean, what a load of crap that was. It's just insane. You just look at the statistics and just look at that graph and you see right away that can't be.
That can't
Right?
be. Yeah. And so to piggyback off that as well, uh, when we're doing these observational studies, as Daniel's saying, they are, which are basically ridiculous because, I mean, to ask someone what they ate a year ago, how many pieces of bacon did you eat in January of 2024 on the 11th of January? I have no idea. I mean, it's almost absurd. But what also I think our friends listening to understand is that they call lasagna meat or they call a hamburger meat, and they don't differentiate between the bun and the sauce and the lettuce and whatever else is in there,
Exactly.
or the Coca-Cola. So how could you say meat is causing a problem? I mean, uh, it's literally laughable. And the other thing about studies that people need to understand is that even the ones that are randomized controlled trials or interventional trials, or because people say, well, this is not an observational trial, this is a randomized control where they put people and they have one group do one thing and one group do another thing. The problem with that is that, and I write this in my book, is that there is 100 co-founding factors that they can't control for. So when they say they adjust for factors, they're basically lying. Because how do you know how much stress somebody's under? How do you know what they're thinking? How do you know their water intake? How do you know how much they're exercising? You cannot, and let me reiterate this for our friends listening. You cannot control for those. So all you get is an association. So what my one of my mentors for my book, Bart K, who I really respect. I think Bart K. Yeah, he's a great guy. He knows. I learned probably 50% of my book from that guy. That's how smart he is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
and
very smart. Very
very,
smart.
very smart. And so he says, unless you have twins, you lock them in a lab for their whole life for 100 years. You control every factor from how they're breathing to what they're drinking to what they're thinking. You have your data is going to be flawed. And so I think this is an important point, Daniel, for the people listening, that they need to understand that. And then you can make your own decision. So when a study says that, fruits and vegetables are great for you, meat causes problems, meat's great for you, just take them all with a grain of salt and do what makes sense. Don't listen to these things because they are not accurate. And if you base your decisions on the ideologies, basically, I call them the ideology of these things, you're going to run into trouble because they're not accurate, because
Yeah.
nutrition science will never be accurate because you can't control for these things. It's unethical and it's financially unfeasible. So I wanted to tell our viewer, people listening about that so they really understand and I wanted to reiterate that point. So they're not scared. Like you write in your
Right.
book, I write in my book, oh, eggs are going to cause your, heart or cause heart, a 50% increase in heart disease. People, I'm not going to eat eggs. Well, I eat 100 eggs. I eat like 300 eggs a month and I feel better than ever. So just please, friends listening, just use your common sense and don't rely on what you hear to be the exact truth.
Yeah, you're exactly right. But even when they do have a decent study, for example, the ischemia trial, there were 3 large trials. Let me just tell you about this. So just give you an idea
Yeah.
that even when they do have a decent study, they ignore the results anyway. Let me
Yeah.
give you an example. There was this large government-funded $100 million study. It involved 5,187 patients, and they divided them into 2 groups.
Mhm.
And they wanted to find out, what the group 1, they sent him in the direction of invasive procedures, right? It was called the ischemia trial. And it's meaning CABG, which is CABG, that's a coronary artery bypass graft. That's open heart surgery
Mhm.
with a bypass,
Mhm.
1 or more bypasses, or PCI, percutaneous coronary intervention, which is a stent.
Okay.
So they went either got the stent or the bypass, and the other group they sent them in the direction of lifestyle.
Mhm.
Lose 30 pounds, get back to the gym, stop eating the unholy trinity or whatever
Mhm.
we're going to call it, the deadly triad, and that kind of thing. Get the junk out of the diet, and they followed them very closely for 4 years. Right? You see, what they wanted to do was they wanted to prove that these invasive procedures were the shit. Because
Mhm.
there's so much of an enormous amount of revenue generated
Yeah.
from them. They
Yeah.
wanted to prove, hey, this is what's going to prevent heart attacks and strokes. And what they found, there was no difference after 4 years. No difference. They
Oops.
said the ischemia trial failed to show that these invasive procedures, which they consider normal, were any good at preventing heart attacks and strokes.
Mhm.
And then they follow up with the Courage trial and the Orbita trial. Same failures. They do not prevent heart attacks and strokes. So I asked my reader in the book, after explaining all this, I say, do you think these invasive procedures will now start to slow down? The graph is going like this. There's more done than ever.
Yeah.
It's just amazing because, look, let's face it, the board of directors of the hospital and the CEO of the cardiology clinic, there's no way they're going to see all of that revenue disappear. If they did, institutions and careers would disappear because, let's face it, there goes the mountain retreat and the beach house, the kids in Ivy League and Mercedes down to Chevy. It would all change.
Chevy.
And,
Yeah.
it's just, that is the reality. That is the reality of it. And so, you have to get all this information and go, okay, so if your doctor says to you, hey, I think we should do a stress test and then go in the cath lab and for a stent. And then if you show him these studies and then you ask him again, so explain to me again why you think I need to get a stent. And
Mhm.
then he'll know that you know. And then, you just take it from there and make your own decisions. If you want to get serious on your lifestyle changes and really go low carb, because it's low carb is very ancestral. As you
Yeah.
know, you've discovered,
Absolutely.
I've
Yeah.
discovered it.
Yeah.
These evolutionarily developed meat bodies that we
Yeah.
all occupy currently, for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, their diet consisted of what we could catch, kill, and eat, nose to tail. Well, we might pick off a tree or a vine, but only when it was in season. But it was a high fat and protein, low carbohydrate diet. There was
Yeah.
never any packaged foods. There weren't any blenders for juicers, and we didn't have any of that nonsense.
No, but
And so,
let me stop really quickly there because you demonstrate this so eloquently in your book on one of the pages here where you have a picture of the a tribe from the 30s. Remember the Inuit or something? Hold on, let me find this here.
well, those guys are Aborigines from Australia.
Yeah, these guys here, and this just really goes to show you. So the people they're listening on a podcast won't see this, but the ones watching on YouTube or another platform like that can see this. But look at these people. Look at the abs on that guy. He's probably 60 years old. I'm 55. My abs aren't even that good. And I work out every day with a trainer. So what Daniel's trying to say is it's right there. You have to eat an ancestral appropriate diet. And meaning that just what he said, meat Animal products, milk. A lot of people think milk is bad. I eat a ton of raw cheese, and I'm fine with it. I believe that raw, the enzymes, uh, since it's raw, the enzymes haven't been denatured as much, so they're probably easier to digest. And you were saying about what we could grab off a tree, a fruit, a nut or a seed, or maybe a piece of grass, some wild cabbage. And to also elaborate a little bit on that, in the past, we didn't have carrots and broccoli and cauliflower and 8,000 million other vegetables. They all came from one or two things. It's all been hybridized. So our ancestors 100,000 years ago weren't going, let me see. Let me take some broccoli and some cauliflower and mix it with a balsamic vinegar, a little bit of salt. How about some cumin and maybe this spice right here? We'll put it all in a bowl. And then you're laughing. It's funny because we'll put it all in a bowl and then we'll all have a celebration and sing Kumbaya. I mean, it didn't work that way back then. I mean, it's just, you got to just use your common sense. And so the paintings on the walls are paintings of them, killing a deer or whatever, but that's the way it was. So nothing against plants, because I still eat a few plants here and there, because it doesn't bother me. I eat maybe 10 grams of carbs a day as opposed to somebody eating 300 grams. So, but the point is plants in very small quantities are actually, I think might be beneficial in some aspect, but not all the time, and not the refined stuff. So just what Daniel was saying, go back to what we were eating. What was grazing on the grass, or what was in the grass in the soil. There was no Oreos in the soil. Or Doritos.
You're so right.
It's not hard to understand.
Yeah, you're so right. People are not taught this information, and we can give them in your book and my book what the ideal is. But I understand people have their lives, and the big thing is the addiction. That's why my subtitle of the book is "How Carbs, Sugar, and Oils Make Us Fat, Sick, and Addicted, and How to Escape Their Grip."
Yes.
Because they are addicting. Because
absolutely.
Big food, they have in their conference rooms around the world and their labs, biochemical geniuses trying to figure out, okay, so what is it we can put into these ingredients that makes them eat more of it? It's more for the bottom line and profits as opposed to what's good for human beings. Because this stuff was just never in the human diet prior to 100 years ago.
Yeah. Now let me piggyback off that really quickly. This is an important point for our friends listening. Now, Daniel's saying that these foods are addictive because the chemicals they're putting in it. Let me tell you what's really going on in the background so you understand what is going on. The reason they're addictive is because of the chemicals they're putting in there. Also because there's no water. I write this in my book. There's no water in these things. Cereals or breads or whatever refined grain it is, a processed food, the body only needs three things on a continual, consistent basis. Now, remember this. If you have to tattoo this on your arm, friends listening, I write that in my book. It's kind of funny. But tattoo this on your arm. Your body only needs three things: water, salt, and minerals. That's it. Okay, now it means protein, obviously, from food and fats, but on a continual, consistent basis. What does that mean? That means that just what Daniel's saying. The reason they're addictive is because they don't contain water. The body's only looking for water at most times. And so when they're putting the chemicals in and all these preservatives, that is causing inflammation and stress, which is causing the body to lose water too. So it's all a water cycle. So that's really what's going on in the very background for people who's listening or are kind of science nerds and want to really know what's going on. That's what's really going on. So water, and I write a lot about water in my book, this is a huge component of what's life, but that's a huge component of why these things are addictive, because they're missing those three things. So I didn't mean to interrupt you once again, but I really want to make the audience understand when you say something, I elaborate so they kind of really get, oh, okay, that's what's going on.
No. Well, listen, let me jump off that
Yeah.
whole addiction thing into chapter 10 is, are you a wheat addict?
Yeah.
And what's that about? Um, what happened was I have this picture of a guy's skull from 100,000 years ago, right?
Yep. Yep.
And he has perfect teeth.
Yep.
And I asked the reader, do you think he had an orthodontist, floss 3 times a day and
He did.
brush?
It was on speed dial, right? Yeah, he did. They had cell phones back then. You didn't know that, Daniel? They all had cell phones.
Yeah, no, hey, listen, I didn't know that part. But anyway, but after, see, we have only been eating wheat and grains for a mere like 9,000 years or so. That's like a snap of the finger in the eons of time, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't really more heavily in the diet until maybe even 5 or 6,000 years ago. What they discovered was they started. Anthropologists and bioarchaeologists tell us that they used these wheat and grains as fallback food.
Yep.
In other words, when animals were not available, which were not infrequently, clever humans learned how to, if they would crush up the seeds of these plants, which that's what grains are, and they added some water, heated it up. They made something like a porridge, which allowed them to survive an extra day or week or month. But their health and wellness took a serious toll, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, everything changed. I mean, all these new diseases started when they started excavating bodies from after that period towards the present. They started noticing, tooth decay, missing teeth, all these new diseases, not as much as the last 100 years or so, but the bone diameter and length shrunk. I mean, men shrunk 5 inches, women shrunk 3 inches. It was a disaster. Everything changed awful. And then in the late 60s and 70s, big ag came in. And prior to that, wheat and grains, they grew to shoulder height, right? Amber waves of grain and all that kind of stuff, right? And what they did was they came up with this thing called chemical mutagenesis and radiation mutagenesis, and that reduces it down to it's 18 inches tall now, but the seeds are bigger, so they can get a bigger yield. But what this does is amps up this chemical called gliadin, 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 and what does that do?
Causes
It
massive
attaches to the
inflammation.
opiate receptors of your brain.
Uh-huh.
And it doesn't get you high or relieve pain, but what it does do, its activity is to make you crave more of the things that have grains and wheat in them, like your bread, pasta, cereal, biscuits, waffles, pancakes, and on that way, right? And so that's why wheat is addicting. Wheat raises your blood sugar, as you know, higher than table sugar. So it's very dangerous. You don't want high blood sugar. They found that wheat raises the blood sugar higher than a Snickers bar, a Snickers candy bar. And when Big Food discovered that in the early 70s, they started putting it into everything. Check out this stat. The average supermarket has 60,000 products, right? Over 59,000 have wheat or some form of wheat in them.
It's amazing.
It's like, what?
Yeah.
So in my chapter 10, I give all the alias that they use. You got to read your ingredients and everything. Even Twizzlers, the candy, the second ingredient is wheat.
You know what?
They're really coming after our opiate receptors. So
wow, I did not know that. And then, you were saying about the different names for wheat. Well, in your book, you write the different names for sugar. And there was a list, like there's probably 30 on this list. There's obviously glucose, there's glucose syrup, there's molasses, there's
they have 262.
Oh, okay. I was
262
wrong.
total.
There's so
that way
many
they can fool us.
Yeah, inverted cane syrup.
The second ingredient or third ingredient might be sugar, and then the fifth ingredient is one of these differently named sugars.
Yeah,
and then the eighth ingredient
syrup
is another one of these differently. So it's mostly sugar, and you don't know it.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So I think for our friends listening is, once again, just use common sense. If it's got a label on it, it's in a box, try not to eat it. I understand people are addicted. Me and Dan have talked about this whole conversation, but just understand what you're doing. Do the best you can. And I write this in my book, do the best you can. and just understand what you're doing. The more you can start eating, real foods. In my book, I write about eat whole foods, whether it's meats, or fruits, or vegetables. Um, and I won't consider grains. I mean, they are whole foods, but they're processed. But I'm talking more about really processed stuff. It's in a box, something like that. Try not to eat it. Try to stay away from breads if you can. And here's something else important for people to understand, Daniel, that's really critical. Um, so people talk about how your metabolism slows down as you get older. Well, by looking at you, you look like you're in fantastic shape and you're around 70 years old. How old are you, 70?
I'm 76.
No way. No,
Hey,
you're
listen, I
not.
got to tell you, man.
I want to see your birth certificate. I don't believe it. There's no way. So my point is, let me go back to my point here. Daniel looks fantastic. For the people listening, go to his website, look at this gentleman. He looks fantastic for 76. I mean, in perfect, looks like he's in
Well,
perfect
thank you,
health.
Ben. Thank you.
My
And if
point, hold
I
on, my point.
myself was shocked at the improvements that I made because see, I was totally bought into the propaganda and the
Mm-hmm.
BS of air quotes coming at you, heart healthy whole grains.
Yeah,
I didn't know that when you eat these whole grains, they turn into sugar in your
yeah,
body. I didn't know any of that. And
absolutely.
and that alone can cause heart disease.
So
And
here's,
so
oh, hold on. Let me say it before I want to finish my point here for people. It's really important.
I'm
So,
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
no,
off.
that's okay. Absolutely. It's fine. What I'm saying for our friends listening, remember this too. Write this down if you have to. Metabolism does not slow down as you get older. We've all heard that, right? Oh, my metabolism's slowing down. I can't lose that weight. I've got, that pregnancy weight I can't lose. It's just, oh my, well, no. Chronic inflammation goes up. Okay, I'm going to say this again. Metabolism does not slow down. Maybe, okay, it slows down slightly, but not to the degree that we're talking about. And there's studies on this. The chronic inflammation in your body goes up. The more chronic inflammation you have in your body, the more it's going to be difficult to lose weight, get those possible six-pack abs if you want it, just to get into physical shape. So remember that it's the chronic inflammation from the wheat and the sugar and all the things that me and Daniel are talking about. You want to limit those. So that's just an important point. I wanted to say that, Daniel, because I think it's so important, especially for your age and how great you look, that I need people to know that you're not on a walker. And these people are listening possibly in maybe in a nursing home or something. Understand you can get way better. You don't have to be where you are. So go ahead,
Yeah,
Daniel.
and listen, another thing, it's so great what you're saying. Yeah, and don't take it, don't jump into it. Go gradient scales little by little, because if you go too fast, you're going to wind up saying, "Oh yeah, I tried that
Yep.
low carb intermittent fasting stuff, but it doesn't work." No, you
Yeah.
got to go. The first thing you got to do is lose the snacks, right,
Mm-hmm.
one by one, and the best way
Mm-hmm.
to do that is to load up to get from point A to point B, from lunch to dinner, is to load up on a healthy, high fat protein lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very satiating.
Yep.
Carbs do not satisfy appetite,
Nope.
they stimulate it.
Yep.
Carbs do not satisfy appetite, they stimulate it.
Mm-hmm.
And my recovery was just so amazing. I thought, I have to share this with my fellow brothers and sister humanoids. And because it just blew my mind. I mean, so in my 70s, I had never done pull-ups before, right? So, well, let me try this. I'm feeling great now. So I knocked out 3 and I
Yay.
kept at it. So 3 turned into 5, 5 turned into 9, 9 turned into 12, 12 turned into 20. And my
Dang.
personal best now is 34.
In a
And I'm
row?
looking around, the kids in their 20s, kids to me, in their 20s and 30s can't do 6. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. So
Wow.
anyway, I'm not bragging or anything,
That's
but the
great.
recovery that you can enjoy once you change things around and eat a more ancestral diet, which is what these humanoid bodies are used to eating for, they tell us, anywhere from 2.6 to 4.5 million years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm down with that. And the more I did that, and more I, ate more ancestrally and, did the right exercise. And because there's another thing I have in chapter 9 about exercise. And they did a big study. It was a meta-analysis of 95 studies, and they wanted to find out what's the best exercise for people over 40. Is it cardio and aerobics, or is it
No.
resistance? And
Resistance.
what they discovered, and they measured it against all the metabolic markers like, HDL, triglycerides, A1C, and that kind of thing, right? So it was really a good analysis. And what they discovered that what people doing resistance training had a tremendous amount of better results in their metabolic markers than the people doing aerobics and the cardio. So if you're over 40, it's best to get to the gym and push the weights, and whether it's free weights or the machines, that kind of thing. Because let's face it, these cardio machines with the treadmills and people running across the road. When did we ever, a million years ago, you and I were in 2,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago or 200, were we running through the jungle for an hour?
No, that's
Just
absurd.
like what?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
were sprinting.
Yes.
We sprinted. We were
Yes.
either chasing animals
Yes.
or being chased.
Yes. And so that's an important point to make. And I read about this in my book as well, is that were we running 26 miles in the jungle for just the hell of it? No, I mean, there was no need for that. We sprinted for a kill or whatever it might be, so we could eat it. And to your point about resistance training, why is this important? Well, it builds muscle. Now, let me tell you, and I think some trainers might not even know this, physical trainers. The reason that you need as much muscle as possible is because muscle has mitochondria, which you talk about in your book. And the mitochondria are the main powerhouse of the cell. And I'm not going to say it's the only thing that produces energy, because there's other ways that energy is produced in a cell, but it's the main way energy is produced in a cell. The more mitochondria you have from something called mitochondrial biogenesis, the more energy you can make. The more mitochondria, and I write this in my book, it's a very important point. The more mitochondria you have, the longer you're most likely going to live, because you're making more energy. So you better treat your mitochondria like your best friends. And by eating sugar and carbs and all the things we're talking about, the processed food, you're hurting your mitochondria. And so I like to make these analogies for our friends listening to make it really simple. Think of your mitochondria as little people or something, and they're in there working away, and you're throwing sugar out, and they're like, dude, I don't like the sugar. Please give us something we can use. They're your friends. You need them. The more mitochondria you can make and keep functioning, the longer you're probably going to live. And so I wanted to stop on to say that, because where you're talking about, it's so important that people, I need, we got to do resistance. Do they know why they're doing the resistance training? Oh, to build muscle. Why are you building muscle? So I always go deeper and deeper. And that's what my podcast is called. We take a deep dive into uncharted waters, right? Because I want people to understand the underlying reason. So then they go, oh, now that makes sense. Go ahead.
You're so right with all that. It's perfect. And also they've done big studies on people that if you're doing exercise of any kind, you're going to live longer. It's just the stats show that. And then also, and the very important thing that I cover also in chapter 9 is, because it's all about exercise and the best kind of do and that kind of thing. There's a section in there called muscle glucose uptake.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? That is where, the whole idea, as you know, is we want to keep our blood sugar down, like our ancestors had, because they didn't, the high blood sugar leads to the insulin resistance, which leads to the inflammation, which leads to all the diseases, all these silent diseases that catch us off guard. And, they're all silent diseases. And, I had no idea I had cardiovascular disease. And what happened with that was one of my 4 comorbidities. See, I didn't know about the proper testing. And what I did was I reached out to Dr. Ford Brewer, who's this genius doctor out of Johns Hopkins, internationally acclaimed preventive medicine doctor. And he is a genius at all the blood tests. So I asked him, I said, would you write a chapter in my book that delineates what are the most important blood labs and scans that anyone can buy online without needing their doctor's prescription? That way you yourself can find out if you got something lurking and ready to pounce, right? Because sometimes you find out about a test or two, you'll go to your doctor, hey doc, I want this one and I'd like this one too. And a lot of times, unfortunately, what you'll get is, oh, you don't need that. You don't need that. You're fine. And the only reason they're saying that is because they don't know what it is. They wouldn't know how to analyze the results. And the last thing that doctors want is homework from their patients, right? Because you might have a doctor that has this little cup on his shelf that says, don't confuse your Google search with my medical degree.
Yeah, I've heard that.
You got that guy, right?
Yeah, I've heard that stuff before. That's don't. Yeah.
Oh my God! So you got to get the right test.
Arrogant. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to get the right test. And that's when I found, see, after I had the heart attack, I took, I got all these tests because I wanted to have a way to measure, have a benchmark to say, okay, so how am I doing 3 months, 6 months down the line and that kind of thing. And when I did these tests, it was amazing. I found out that I was a raging type 2 diabetic and I didn't know it. Here's the thing. There was a study out of Johns Hopkins in 2019, and 2019 is like, 10 minutes ago in the medical field because it takes so long for the information to get out and even into the curriculum of the schools. So they found that 74% of doctors, now we're talking internists, general practitioners, and cardiologists, 74% do not know how to properly test for prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? No wonder it's a silent epidemic. What they do is most doctors, they will test the fasting blood glucose and your A1C. And even the American Diabetes Association, which I don't trust as far as I could throw them, even they say, hey, you might miss a ton of patients because there's so many people, up to 70%, depending on the population, that can have normal readings on your fasting blood glucose and A1C and yet be a raging type 2 diabetic because they don't do the right test.
Yeah,
and that was me. When I did this test, I cover it in chapter 7. It's called the most important health test you've never had.
You're
and that's because doctors don't order it.
Yeah.
And what that test is, if I can go into it a little bit, it's the OGTT with insulin, oral glucose tolerance test with insulin. And when I did that one, my score was well over 200. I was totally in the type 2 diabetic zone and heart disease zone.
Well, let me explain to our friends listening. So what Daniel's saying is that the doctors test the glucose and the fasting glucose, the A1C. And I write this in my book as well. Once again, it's common sense. We said earlier in this conversation, your glucose has to stay in range to some extent. Otherwise, you die. So if a fasting glucose doesn't mean anything because the body has to keep it in that range. And when you get diabetes from all the sugar and inflammation, all those things, it's like it's finally going, okay, we're getting out of control. We can't handle this sugar anymore. But in the meantime, for the last 20 or 30 years, it has to stay in a perfect range, kind of like your pH of your blood within 7.35 to 7.45. There's the same thing with your blood glucose. Okay. So for our listening friends, understand this. This is really important. There is 1 teaspoon of sugar in your blood at all times. And Daniel knows that. There's 1 teaspoon. Okay. That's it, which is 4 grams. How many grams of carb does somebody eat a day? 100, 200, 300? Do you understand the discrepancy there? Not to mention, when you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, your blood glucose, the amount in the blood from a teaspoon goes up. It's either a quarter teaspoon or a half a teaspoon. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's either only a half a teaspoon more or a quarter teaspoon more of sugar in the blood makes you either pre-diabetic or diabetic. Do you understand how small that is, audience? I mean, seriously, people just need to understand these things like we're talking about so they can make up their own mind and use their own, cognitive abilities to understand this stuff. And so what he's saying about insulin is the insulin's going to have to manage that sugar all the time. So it's either high or low. It's trying to manage that sugar. And so getting that insulin fasting, oral glucose tolerance test fasting insulin, that's measuring your true state of your health. So I just wanted to really let our friends listening, Daniel, to understand that. Because my glucose is in check, it's fine. No, it has to be in check or you're dead.
Well, the sad thing about it is your doctors don't know this. What you and I just talked about, they don't know it.
It's absurd.
And that's why you got to get Ben's book. You got to get my book. You got to read this stuff.
And understand it.
It's just, none of this is our opinion.
No.
My book is what I tell the reader in the beginning of the book. I said, look, I know you might be thinking without formal medical degrees and organic chemistry and so forth, why the hell should I trust you? And I say, well, don't. None of this is Daniel's opinion. Just think of me as a friendly relay point of what the best of 21st century science has to offer for your health and wellness, and fix yourself. I did. You can too.
Absolutely.
And to give some encouragement to your listeners and the fact that when you do this gradually and you get the carbs and the sugar and the oils out of your diet, your taste buds will change eventually. And you won't even desire those anymore. And you won't even, once you eat more like a keto, low carb, ketovore, carnivore, your sensation, the desire for your taste buds for the sensation of sweetness, it just goes away. I mean, if I feel like I'd like a little dessert or something if I just have, I don't know, a teaspoon of blueberries, I'm good.
Absolutely.
That's like I ate a Snickers bar, right?
Yeah. I feel the same way. Yeah. It's the same thing with me. It's like, I eat it's mostly carnivore type of diet, but I'll have a few vegetables here and there. But I basically eat the same thing all the time. And if someone offered me a cookie right now or a cake or something, I might eat one bite, but you don't have a desire to do that. And so for our friends listening, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's hard. It's hard. Don't do it overnight, and for our vegan friends listening, if you want to eat vegetables, that's fine. You can live off of vegetables. But even our vegan friends talk about don't eat processed foods. Try to limit those. And this is just common sense. And so for in closing, Daniel, where can people find you, and what would you like them to know? In closing about this and you as well.
Well, they can go to danieltrevor.com and they can get a free preview of the book. And what that is the first 48 pages of the book. And that way I tell people, look, I say, just read the introduction and you'll know right away if you're interested in seeing more. And then you can click to go buy it. And fortunately, after I appeared on Dr. Ken Berry's, it became an international bestseller. It was like, what?
Good for you.
And I thought, well, I got to do more of these podcasts, even though I'm not, I'm not the most eloquent guy in the world, but, I thought, what the hell? And in fact, I should tell you that I was kind of scared when I found out about that. They invited me out. I was on with his team and I said, okay, so because I was new to all this book interview stuff, right? So I said, if I mess up, we can go back and edit that part out, right? And they said, oh, no, it's his live stream. Wait,
no.
How many millions of followers does he have? He's got 3 point something on YouTube and he's got more millions on social media. I went, holy shit. They said, what's the matter? I said, well, I did write the book and I know the data, but rolling it off my tongue in a smooth fashion is a little different, So, you'll be fine. Don't worry. So I thought, what the hell? I took the deep dive. And so, I may have been not as smooth as I'd like to be in certain places, but that video really put the book on the map. And and it's remained in the top 10 on heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and longevity ever since. And so that was earlier this year. So I'm really fortunate for that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so danieltrevor.com, they can get, when they sign up for that, they get on the mailing list. And again, it's Unholy Trinity, how carbs, sugar, and oils make us fat, sick, and addicted, and how to escape their grip, which is the important part.
Yeah, and let me say too, there's a lot of books on health. There's a million books on health, and all saying, lose weight this way, get 6-pack abs. A lot of them are written so poorly that you can't get through the first or second chapter. They have no way, they're not writers. And so me and Daniel and I, he has an innate ability to write. And what I mean by that, it's interesting. He makes some jokes in there, but he writes in the first person like I do. And when you write in the first person, like you're talking to your friend, your book's going to be good. If you don't write in the first person and give a bunch of facts, it's not going to be good. So my point is that his book is written in the first person, and you're not going to put it down because there's a ton of information here. But the way he puts it together in story form and just talking to you like a friend is really, really impactful. So anyway,
Well,
Dan,
the main reason for that, if I can, I know you want to end off and we'll do that, but the main reason is because, look, you just have to look at me. I'm one of the victims of the false data and fake science that's been foisted on the populations and the doctors for way too many decades. Your doctor doesn't know this information. If you get the book, do the best you can to get it in the hands of any healthcare practitioner, because it's a population type grassroots expansion that's going on now with the low carb community and eating more ancestrally. But if you can get it into the hands of, we are getting more doctors, like you say, Dr. Kiltz that you interviewed and so on, and Dr. Ken Berry. And, I have other doctors that have, Dr. Philip Ovadia, who's a cardiologist.
Yeah.
He's done over 3,200 heart operations.
Yeah.
And he's carnivore.
Yeah.
And it's just what we've been fed is just a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry for the lack of French or the.
No, it's totally fine. It's fine.
Thing.
It's just people need to just, do some critical thinking. I know people's lives are busy. I appreciate everyone listening, all our friends listening for the last hour. I know you have your time is valuable and you can be doing other things and listening to other podcasts. But I think with our podcast, I'm making it as interesting as I can and talking about things that are really, I put myself in the listener's shoes. What do they want to hear? So that after they're done listening to our podcast today, they can get out and say, hey, to their friends or family, go, hey, I learned on the Ultimate Health Model podcast, I learned about sugar and this, and it was really fascinating. So it's just this kind of stuff. So anyway, thank you so much, Daniel. It's been a pleasure. And I can't say enough about you. You're just an inspiration to a lot of people. So thank you so much,
Thank you,
Daniel.
Benjamin. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. All right.